Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell lived for the roar of Apache rotors cutting through hostile skis. It wasn't just a sound to her. It was a promise of purpose, of control, of being exactly where she was meant to be. While others flinched at incoming fire or the chaos of combat, Sarah thrived in it. Her hands never shook on the controls, her decisions never lagged. That was why soldiers on the ground trusted her voice over the radio more than anything else. When Sarah Mitchell was overhead, survival chances went up. Everyone knew it. She hadn't earned that reputation easily. Years of relentless training, sleepless nights, and missions that pushed her beyond human limits had shaped her into what she was. She had outperformed expectations from the very beginning, often flying missions others hesitated to accept. Some called her reckless, others called her gifted. The truth was somewhere in between. Sarah simply refused to fail when lives depended on her. That morning had started like any other. The desert air was cold, unusually still, as the first light of dawn crept over the horizon. Mechanics moved around the hangar with quiet efficiency, preparing aircraft for the day's operations. Sarah walked in with her usual focused stride, helmet tucked under her arm, already mentally running through checklists. There was a mission scheduled later that day, and she had been selected to lead it. Nothing unusual, nothing out of place. Until everything changed. "Mitchell!" The voice came from behind her, sharp, authoritative. She turned to see her commanding officer standing near the operations room door. His expression was unreadable, which immediately put her on edge. He wasn't a man who wasted time with formalities unless something serious was happening. "Sir," she replied, stepping forward. "Report inside, now." No explanation, no context. Inside, the room felt colder than it should have. Two additional officers stood near the table, both unfamiliar. That alone was unusual. Sarah's instincts sharpened instantly, picking up on the tension hanging thick in the air. "Lieutenant," her commanding officer began, not meeting her eyes, effective immediately, "your flight status is suspended." For a moment, the words didn't register. "Sir," she asked, certain she had misheard. "You are grounded, pending further review." The statement hit harder the second time. Grounded. The word echoed in her mind like a shockwave. It didn't make sense. There had been no incident report, no disciplinary warning, nothing that could justify something this severe. "On what grounds?" she asked, her voice steady but firm. "Operational irregularities during your last mission," one of the unfamiliar officers answered. His tone was clinical, detached, like he was reading from a script. "That's not possible," Sarah replied immediately. "That mission was completed successfully. No casualties, no errors." "Nevertheless," the officer continued, "the decision stands." Sarah felt something tighten in her chest, not fear but disbelief. She had replayed every mission in her career countless times, analyzing every move, every decision. There was no irregularity, no mistake. "Then I'd like to see the report," she said. "That won't be necessary at this time." Now it was clear. This wasn't just an order. This was a wall being placed in front of her. "With respect, sir, it is necessary," Sarah pushed, her tone sharpening. "You're grounding me without evidence." "That's enough, Lieutenant," her commanding officer cut in, his voice low but final. "You are to hand over your flight clearance and remain on base until further notice." Silence followed, heavy, suffocating silence. Sarah stood there for a moment longer, searching their faces for something, anything that made sense. She found nothing. No anger, no disappointment, just distance. "Understood," she finally said. But she didn't mean it. Outside, the world felt different. The same base, the same people, yet everything had shifted. Word traveled fast. It always did. By the time she reached the hangar again, she could feel the eyes on her. Whispers followed. "She got pulled. Something happened last mission. I heard she almost took out friendlies." That last one made her stop. Slowly she turned her head toward the group of soldiers speaking in low tones. They immediately went quiet, avoiding her gaze. That was all the confirmation she needed. A story was already spreading, and it wasn't the truth. Her jaw tightened as she walked past them, forcing herself to keep moving. Anger wouldn't help, not yet. Inside the hangar, her Apache sat exactly where it always did, silent, waiting. For a moment, she just stood there, staring at it. It didn't make sense. Machines didn't lie. Data didn't lie. Something had happened between the mission and now, something that twisted reality into whatever version they were pushing. Sarah. She turned to see her co-pilot Daniels approaching. He looked different, tense, avoiding direct eye contact. "Tell me what's going on," she said immediately. Daniels hesitated. That hesitation said more than words ever could. "I can't," he muttered. Her eyes narrowed. "Ka or whoa. It's not that simple." "It is that simple," she shot back. "We were on that mission together. You know exactly what happened." He rubbed the back of his neck, clearly uncomfortable. "They're saying the targeting system." "I know what they're saying," she interrupted. "I want to hear what you're not saying." Another pause, longer this time. Finally, Daniels shook his head. "Just let it go, Sarah." That hit harder than the order itself. "Let it go," she repeated, disbelief creeping into her voice. "They just ended my career and you want me to let it go." "It's bigger than you think," he said quietly. Those words lingered in the air. "Then explain it," she demanded. But Daniels had already taken a step back. "I'm sorry," he said, before turning and walking away. Sarah watched him go, something cold settling in her chest. "Bigger than you think." That wasn't fear talking, that was warning. She turned back to her helicopter, eyes tracing every detail of it. The machine she trusted more than anything had become the center of something she didn't yet understand. Her mind began to race, piecing together fragments from the mission, the dust storm, the incoming fire, the moment everything almost went wrong. The targeting system. Her expression changed. That was it. That was the moment they were using. But they were using it wrong. She remembered it clearly now, the sudden lock, the system glitching, targeting something it shouldn't, and then her override, fast, precise, controlled. She had fixed it. So why were they saying she caused it? Unless... Her eyes hardened. Unless someone needed it to look that way. Sarah exhaled slowly, the anger now sharpening into something far more dangerous: focus. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was intentional. And if it was intentional, that meant one thing. Someone had decided she needed to be grounded. The question was no longer why she was banned from flying. The question was who made that decision, and what they were trying to hide. As the distant sound of rotors filled the air, another Apache lifted off into the sky without her. Sarah didn't look up this time. Instead, she turned and walked toward the operations building, her steps steady, her mind already shifting gears. If they thought grounding her would end this, they didn't know her at all. Because Sarah Mitchell wasn't just going to accept the lie. She was going to tear it apart. The night was darker than usual at the base, the desert wind slicing through the silence like sharp glass. Sarah Mitchell sat alone in the corner of her small barracks room, staring at the ceiling. The day had been endless, every second weighed down by disbelief and anger. Her flight status had been revoked, her career publicly questioned, and her co-pilot had refused to defend her. Whispers, rumors, and half-truths had already begun swirling, contaminating the minds of soldiers who had once trusted her. Even the Apache, her lifeline in the sky, had become a reminder of the injustice she faced. She couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't think about anything else except what had happened during that last mission. She replayed the final moments over and over, letting each image, each sound sink deep into her mind. The convoy moving cautiously through the dust-streaked valley. The sudden burst of enemy fire. her Apache rocking violently under the gusts and bullets. And then the targeting system, the brief, impossible lock on friendly vehicles that could have ended in disaster. But she had acted instinctively, overriding the system in milliseconds. Lives were saved. Her hands had been steady. Her decisions had been precise. Yet now she was being blamed. Sarah clenched her fists, nails digging into her palms. It was infuriating, but it was also telling. Someone had rewritten the narrative. Someone had deliberately turned the story of heroism into one of failure. Her gut told her that it wasn't just a bureaucratic mistake. This was an orchestrated attempt to remove her from the sky. She had enemies, yes, but this was professional, calculated, and deliberate. And that realization sent a shiver down her spine. Whoever was behind it was powerful and dangerous. Her mind raced with possibilities. Why target her? She thought of the mission logs, of the internal communications, of the maintenance reports. Could someone have ignored the system defect on purpose? And if so, why? The questions multiplied, each one heavier than the last. She knew she couldn't trust anyone fully, not yet. The moment she stepped outside her room, she felt the eyes of the base on her. Soldiers avoided her gaze, whispers died mid-sentence, and even Daniels, her co-pilot, seemed to retreat further. Trust had become a scarce commodity, and Sarah realized she had no choice but to go it alone. She stood packing the room. Each step was deliberate, each breath measured. Anger alone wouldn't save her career or uncover the truth. She needed evidence, and she needed access. The official channels were closed, tightly controlled by those who had orchestrated this. A request for clarification would be denied. A formal inquiry could be buried before it began. If she wanted the truth, she would have to find it herself. Her hand hovered over her laptop. Security protocols, encrypted files, classified communications. She knew all the doors that could lead to answers. She remembered the technicians she trusted, those quiet men and women who worked nights fixing systems and cleaning up glitches without ever asking for recognition. If anyone could help her navigate the hidden corners of the system, it was them. She didn't have time for hesitation. The night was her ally. While the base slept, she would dig. By midnight, Sarah had reached the archive room. It was small, windowless, and packed with rows of servers that hummed like quiet giants. Only a few technicians had clearance to be here, and tonight, one of them was waiting. "Sarah," whispered a familiar voice. It was Tech Sergeant Ramirez, a veteran of the base's electronics division. His eyes darted toward the hall, ensuring no one was near. "I didn't think you'd come." "I don't have a choice," Sarah replied quietly. "They've erased everything about that mission. I need to see the raw data." Ramirez nodded, gesturing toward a terminal. "I can pull logs, flight telemetry, maintenance reports, but it's risky. If anyone finds out, it won't just be your career on the line." "I understand," Sarah said, her jaw set. "Do it." The two worked silently, Ramirez navigating encryption protocols and firewalls while Sarah watched, memorizing every detail. Hours passed as the systems revealed their secrets. Each file, each timestamp, each coded message brought a clearer picture, and what she found made her blood run cold. Weeks before her mission, the Apache's targeting system had shown intermittent malfunctions during routine maintenance checks. Warnings had been logged repeatedly by engineers, warnings that should have grounded the aircraft immediately. Instead, they were ignored. Higher-ups had redirected resources, citing budget constraints and operational priorities. When she had flown her mission, she had been flying a machine known to have critical flaws. And when the system malfunctioned mid-flight, she had done what any competent pilot would do: override it, prevent disaster, and save lives. Yet in the official report, every detail was altered. The system's malfunction was replaced with pilot error. The warnings had disappeared. Communications from maintenance engineers were missing. Even her own co-pilot's observations were edited. Whoever had done this had gone to great lengths to construct a narrative that painted her as reckless, incompetent, and dangerous. Sarah felt her stomach churn. This was deliberate sabotage. "Someone's trying to ruin you," Ramirez said finally, breaking the tense silence. "And they've been planning it for a long time." "I know," Sarah replied, voice cold, "and I'm going to find out who." They continued digging, tracing the edits through system logs, metadata, and communication trails. It was painstaking work, but patterns began to emerge. The alterations came from accounts linked to senior officers, accounts normally untouchable, accounts protected by layers of bureaucracy. Whoever had manipulated the report had both knowledge and influence, a dangerous combination. Hours blurred into the early morning. Sarah's eyes were red from staring at screens, her mind exhausted but relentless. Every piece of evidence she uncovered was another confirmation of what she had suspected. This wasn't about safety, competence, or procedure. This was about power. Someone had deliberately endangered her career to cover up their own failures. And then, buried deep in an overlooked maintenance log, Sarah found the final piece she had been searching for. It was a time-stamped warning sent to a secure communications network weeks before her mission. The Apache's targeting system had failed during a simulated exercise. Engineers had flagged it, and the report had been sent up the chain of command. It should have grounded the helicopter immediately. Instead, the message had vanished. Someone at a high level had ignored it. And by doing so, they had created a crisis, and then framed her for it. Sarah exhaled slowly, letting the weight of the discovery settle. This was bigger than she had imagined. It wasn't just a single officer trying to cover their mistake. This was an entire chain of command willing to manipulate reality to protect themselves. And now, she had proof. She leaned back in the chair, staring at the glowing screens. The anger that had fueled her earlier was now sharpened into clarity. This wasn't about frustration anymore. This was about justice. And if she didn't act, more soldiers could be put in danger, and her own name would remain tarnished. Her thoughts returned to Daniels, her co-pilot. He had refused to speak, hiding behind fear. But Sarah knew the truth. He had witnessed everything, and he knew what she knew. Slowly, a plan began forming in her mind. She would need allies, but she had to be careful. One wrong move, and this chain of command, so skilled at burying mistakes, could bury her along with the truth. She also knew she couldn't rely solely on the chain of command, not with them complicit. She needed someone who could listen without prejudice, someone with authority and credibility beyond the base. One name came to mind, the Admiral scheduled to inspect the base next week. It was a long shot, but if anyone could bypass the layers of corruption and see the truth for what it was him. Her mind worked fast, plotting the next moves. Step 1. Compile all the evidence into a clear, indisputable format. Step 2. Ensure no one could intercept or delete it. Step 3. Present it to someone with power and integrity. She looked at Ramirez, who had been quietly assisting her. "Are you in?" she asked. He nodded, expression grim but resolute. "I've got your back." That was all she needed to hear. The desert wind whispered outside, carrying the sound of distant rotors. A new mission had begun, not one of combat but one of uncovering truth. Sarah's fingers hovered over the keyboard, every keystroke deliberate. Every file, every timestamp, every anomaly was another weapon in her arsenal. And as the first light of dawn crept into the barracks, painting the walls in gold and shadow, Sarah felt something she hadn't felt in days: control. The same control she had always felt in the cockpit, with life and death balanced at her fingertips. The difference now was that the battlefield had shifted. The enemy wasn't just out there. The enemy was here, hiding in plain sight, behind ranks, reports, and silence. Sarah Mitchell didn't flinch. She never had, and she never would. Because this was a fight she couldn't lose. And she was just getting started. The desert heat of early morning burned like a warning as Sarah Mitchell made her way to the restricted access terminal. Each step through the base felt heavier than the last, every glance from a fellow soldier a potential threat. Eyes followed her, whispers danced behind her back, and for the first time the realization hit her fully. The battlefield she was fighting on wasn't outside, it was inside. The Apache she loved was grounded, her reputation shredded, and the chain of command she had trusted for years had become an enemy. She paused outside the access room, fingers brushing against the cold metal door. Ramirez had already arrived, waiting silently, a protective shadow against a world of suspicion. "You sure about this?" he asked quietly. His eyes scanned the perimeter, noting the early patrols. Sarah didn't need to answer. She was sure. There was no going back. The room smelled faintly of ozone and heated circuits. Servers hummed like dormant predators, each one holding secrets too many wanted buried. Sarah booted up the terminal, fingers flying over the keys with precise urgency. Ramirez monitored the security logs, keeping the path clear. Files, emails, maintenance logs, encrypted communication threads, all the information she had been denied, were now at her fingertips. "Start with the mission files," Sarah said, voice steady despite the pounding of adrenaline in her chest. Ramirez nodded, navigating through layers of access protocols, bypassing permissions as though he were performing a delicate surgery. Each click revealed more data, more truth, more evidence of what had been hidden from the world. Sarah stared at the first batch of logs. There it was, timestamps, error messages, maintenance warnings. The Apache's targeting system had been unstable long before her mission. Engineers had flagged it multiple times, each alert ignored, buried in higher-level correspondence. And now her mission, a high-risk operation under enemy fire, had been flown in a helicopter known to have critical flaws. "This is worse than I thought," Ramirez muttered. "They deliberately flew you in a defective machine to cover their own negligence." Sarah exhaled, feeling both rage and clarity settle in her chest. "And when it failed mid-flight, they tried to make it look like my mistake." They dug deeper, tracing edits in the official report back to individual user accounts. Layers of security and bureaucratic red tape revealed their true purpose: concealment. Whoever had altered the logs knew exactly what they were doing. Every alteration had a signature, a timestamp, a digital fingerprint that pointed to the highest levels of command. "Senior officer accounts," Ramirez whispered. "These aren't junior mistakes, this is deliberate." Sarah felt the weight of it. The problem wasn't isolated. The system wasn't broken by accident. It had been weaponized against her. And if this was being done to her, how many others had fallen victim without even knowing it? How many soldiers had faced danger because of manipulated reports and ignored warnings? Her mind went back to Daniels, her co-pilot, who had refused to speak. Fear, she realized, was a survival tactic. He had seen everything but had been paralyzed by the power of those orchestrating the cover-up. She didn't blame him. She had to use the same caution, but she couldn't wait. The longer the truth remained hidden, the more people were at risk, and the more irreparable the damage to her career. Hours passed as they traced communication threads, piecing together a narrative of intentional negligence. Engineers, emails disappeared from official logs, altered reports replaced with falsified entries, flight telemetry shifted to portray errors that never happened. Sarah leaned closer to the screen, her eyes scanning every detail, memorizing patterns, making mental notes. Every deletion, every edit, every missing timestamp was a fingerprint leading back to the orchestrators. "This isn't just a cover-up," she said finally. "This is a conspiracy." Ramirez glanced at her. "Are you ready for what comes next? Once we start connecting the dots, there's no going back. They'll know someone's looking, and they won't hesitate to protect themselves." Sarah didn't flinch. Fear had no place here. "I've already gone too far to stop now." By mid-morning, they had compiled a detailed map of the chain of command involved in the sabotage. Names she had trusted, names she respected, people who had been elevated because of competence, now exposed as manipulators of truth. The evidence was damning: maintenance logs ignored, warnings suppressed, mission data altered, falsified reports filed, and crucial communications erased. This wasn't just about her mission anymore. This was about the integrity of the entire base. "Whoever did this," Sarah muttered, "knew exactly what they were doing, and they knew I would notice." Ramirez nodded grimly. Which makes it even more dangerous for you. But Sarah didn't hesitate. Every revelation only sharpened her resolve. If she wanted to restore her career, protect other soldiers, and hold those responsible accountable, she had no choice but to confront the system directly. And for that, she needed an ally with authority beyond the reach of those manipulating the records. One name surfaced immediately in her mind: the Admiral. The Admiral was scheduled for a base inspection in a few days, a rare opportunity to present undeniable evidence to someone with the power to intervene. But getting access wasn't simple. Sarah needed timing, precision, and courage. She also needed to prepare the evidence meticulously. Every file, every log, every piece of data had to be arranged logically, incontrovertibly, leaving no room for doubt. They spent the next 2 nights working in near silence. Sarah's focus was absolute. Every detail mattered. The maintenance logs had to match the timestamps of the mission files. Communications had to be cross-referenced with edits to show a clear pattern of manipulation. The altered report had to be reconstructed alongside the original to demonstrate the falsification. Ramirez coordinated the technical logistics, ensuring the files could be presented securely, avoiding detection by those who would erase the evidence if discovered. By the 3rd night, they had a complete dossier. Sarah reviewed it repeatedly, rehearsing how she would explain each piece of evidence, anticipating questions, and preparing for the inevitable skepticism of high-ranking officials. She didn't just need the Admiral to see the truth, she needed him to believe it beyond question. She also considered Daniels carefully. If he could be convinced to testify or provide corroboration, his eyewitness account would add immense credibility. But she had to approach him delicately. Fear, even among allies, could sabotage everything. She needed him to see the importance of the moment without risking his safety or loyalty. Early the following morning, Sarah made her decision. She would confront Daniels, present the evidence carefully, and ensure he understood the stakes. Then she would wait for the Admiral's inspection, ready to strike at the perfect moment. Timing was everything. A single misstep could mean permanent exile from the Air Corps, or worse. Daniels hesitated at first, but as Sarah explained the evidence, his fear slowly transformed into anger, then determination. "I saw it happen," he said finally, voice steady. "They're trying to bury this, and they thought you wouldn't notice. I can't let them do it either." Sarah nodded. "Good, then we move forward together, but every word, every move must be precise. One leak, one mistake, and it's over." For the first time since the grounding, Sarah felt a sense of controlled momentum. The pieces were finally falling into place. She had evidence, allies, and a plan. The injustice done to her, and potentially countless others, would not go unchallenged. The desert sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the hangar and the base. Outside, Apache helicopters lifted off one by one, performing their scheduled drills. Sarah watched them ascend, a reminder of both her absence and the stakes at play. Her own helicopter remained grounded, a silent sentinel of the career and honor she had fought so hard to protect. And yet, despite the weight of betrayal and danger, a fire burned within her. She had faced impossible odds in the air before, and she would face them again. Only this time, the enemy was not on the battlefield. It was hidden in the very structures meant to protect her and those she served. Hours passed in meticulous preparation. Sarah and Ramirez double-checked the dossier, encrypted communications, and backup files. They created a chronological reconstruction of events, highlighting the negligence, falsifications, and deliberate attempts to frame her. Every piece was irrefutable, leaving no room for manipulation. When everything was ready, Sarah allowed herself a moment to breathe. The fight ahead would be dangerous, unpredictable, and fraught with political obstacles, but she had something her enemies didn't: the truth. And the truth, she knew, was a weapon far more powerful than any Apache helicopter or advanced targeting system. As night fell, Sarah sat back, reviewing the files one final time. The hum of the base settled into a low, constant background noise. For the first time since being grounded, she felt the weight of possibility, control, agency, and the chance to restore her name. The mission was no longer in the skis. It was here within the walls of the base, against the invisible enemy of corruption and deceit. And Sarah Mitchell was ready. The morning sun painted the base in harsh gold, reflecting off the polished armor of parked helicopters and glinting metal walkways. Sarah Mitchell moved through it with purpose, her stride measured, each step deliberate. The Apache helicopters were already performing pre-flight checks, their rotors spinning lazily in the early warmth. Soldiers who had once greeted her with smiles now avoided her gaze entirely. Whispers followed her, subtle but unmistakable, like the static hum of an approaching storm. Inside the operations building, she met Ramirez, who had arrived early as always. He handed her a small, encrypted drive. "Everything you need," he said quietly. "All logs, all edits, all the maintenance warnings. It's all here. Nothing's missing, but you'll need the Admiral. You can't do this alone." Sarah nodded. She had already thought of the Admiral, a rare visitor to the base, one who commanded respect and had authority beyond the reach of the officers who had orchestrated her grounding. If anyone could bypass the layers of manipulation and see the truth for what it was him. But getting to him wouldn't be easy. The Admiral's schedule was tight and security was tighter. Every meeting was scheduled, every moment accounted for, leaving little room for impromptu confrontations. And yet, she knew she had one advantage: timing. She had studied his itinerary and knew the window when he would observe flight operations. If she could present the evidence at that exact moment, it would be impossible to ignore. Sarah and Ramirez worked through the morning, organizing the dossier meticulously. Each piece of evidence had a purpose. Maintenance logs showed the system defects. Telemetry files illustrated the moments she had overridden the targeting system to save lives. Communication threads demonstrated ignored warnings and erased messages. The official report, juxtaposed with the original unaltered logs, made it impossible to dispute the manipulation. Hours later, Sarah approached Daniels, her co-pilot, who had been silent for the past day. His nervous energy was palpable, hands twitching, eyes darting. "We have everything," she said softly, placing the drive in his hands. "I need you to understand the stakes. This isn't just about me. It's about exposing a system that endangered lives and tried to bury the truth. You saw everything. You know what really happened. You need to stand with me." Daniels swallowed hard, glancing down at the drive. "If we do this, if we confront them," his voice faltered, "it could ruin us for good." Sarah met his gaze, unwavering. "And if we don't, they win. How many soldiers' lives could be at risk if this corruption continues? How many people will be silenced next?" His shoulders stiffened. He nodded slowly. "Okay, I'm with you." Together, the three of them moved to the briefing room just as the Admiral's convoy arrived. The security protocols were formidable, but Sarah had anticipated every checkpoint. With Ramirez's technical expertise and Daniel's support, they slipped through with minimal scrutiny. Every heartbeat in Sarah's chest matched the rhythm of the rotors outside, the distant sound a reminder of what she had been denied. The briefing room was already packed with senior officers when the Admiral entered. The atmosphere was tense, disciplined, every officer standing rigidly at attention. The room went silent as he approached the front, his gaze scanning the assembled personnel. Sarah felt a chill of apprehension. One misstep could end everything. But hesitation had no place here, not when the truth was finally within reach. She stepped forward unexpectedly, heart pounding. Gasps rippled across the room. Her commanding officer froze, lips parting as if to stop her, but the Admiral raised a hand, signaling her to continue. "Let her speak," he said, voice authoritative, carrying over the hum of tension. Sarah swallowed, drawing a slow breath. "Sir," she began, voice steady, "I was grounded unjustly following my last mission. The official report claims operational errors on my part, but the evidence proves otherwise. The Apache helicopter I flew had pre-existing targeting system failures, documented and ignored. During the mission, the system malfunctioned, but I overrode it, saving the convoy and preventing casualties. The report was altered to falsely accuse me of negligence. Whispers erupted across the room, but the Admiral's hand cut through the chatter. Sarah clicked a button on the drive and screens flickered to life. Telemetry data, maintenance logs, and internal communications appeared in a chronological display. Every alteration, every erased message, every ignored warning was visible, undeniable. The room fell silent. Every officer's eyes shifted between the screens and Sarah, realization dawning. The narrative they had been rehearsing for weeks crumbled before them. Even those who had doubted her competence couldn't argue with the raw data. "Lieutenant Mitchell," the Admiral said finally, voice low but cutting through the tension like a blade, "explain this." Sarah stepped forward, pointing to the timeline on the screen. The Apache's targeting system was flagged as defective weeks before my mission. Warnings were sent up the chain of command. They were ignored. When the system locked onto friendly vehicles, I overrode it instantly, saving lives. Yet the report was edited to make it appear as if I caused the malfunction. Those responsible for covering up the defect manipulated the records to frame me and protect themselves. The Admiral's gaze hardened as he absorbed the information. "And this is verifiable?" he asked. "Yes, sir," Sarah replied firmly. "Every log, every email, every deleted message has been preserved. The alterations can be traced to specific senior officers." A heavy pause followed. The weight of truth filled the room. Officers shifted uncomfortably, some avoiding the Admiral's gaze, others staring at Sarah with a mixture of awe and fear. The silence was broken only by the faint hum of the screens, illuminating every manipulated detail. The Admiral turned sharply toward her commanding officer. "You will account for this," he said, voice cold. "Immediately." Orders were given, investigations initiated, and officers who had orchestrated the cover-up were summoned. The evidence was undeniable, and attempts to explain it away were futile. Sarah watched as the tide began to turn. The very system that had tried to bury her now had to confront the truth. Even Daniel, standing beside her, looked relieved but tense. "You did it," he whispered. Sarah shook her head. "We did it, but this is only the beginning." The Admiral motioned for a private meeting. Once alone, he studied her with an intensity that made her hold her ground. "Lieutenant Mitchell," he said slowly, "you've done something remarkable. You've not only defended yourself, but you've exposed a systemic failure that could have endangered countless lives. Courage like yours is rare. Integrity like yours is rarer. I will see that your career and your name are fully restored." A weight lifted from her chest, but the relief was tempered by the knowledge of the battles still ahead. Some officers would be punished, some reputations destroyed, and some alliances irreparably broken. But Sarah now held leverage, evidence, and the Admiral's backing. As she returned to the hangar, the Apache waited silently. The rotor stood still, a reminder of the flight she had been denied and the truth she had reclaimed. She approached it carefully, brushing her hand along the metal hull. The machine hummed softly under her touch, responsive and familiar, as though acknowledging her resilience. Ramirez and Daniels flanked her, both sharing the quiet satisfaction of victory tempered by the awareness that the fight wasn't over. Every file, every log, every altered message had been exposed, but the consequences would ripple outward. Careers would be ruined. Trust would be fractured. And Sarah knew she would never look at the chain of command the same way again. Hours later, Sarah finally climbed into the cockpit. The familiar scent of oil, leather, and machinery enveloped her. She adjusted the helmet, ran through the pre-flight checklist with deliberate precision, and took a deep breath. This was her domain. The Apache roared to life beneath her, powerful and precise, just as it had always been. As she lifted off into the sky, the desert below stretched endlessly, both beautiful and unforgiving. The wind whipped past, and the sun gleamed off her rotors. Every decision, every action, every ounce of training came alive in her hands. She wasn't just flying. She was reclaiming authority, restoring balance, and proving her worth beyond question. The battlefield had shifted from the desert floor to the corridors of power, but Sarah Mitchell was undefeated. The rotors cut through the air like a blade, sharp and unstoppable. She had faced an invisible enemy, one that hid behind paperwork, bureaucracy, and silence, and she had conquered it. Below her, the base seemed smaller, the world narrower, yet the stakes remained higher than ever. Each soldier on the ground, unaware of the full story, depended on her judgment. And now, with the truth exposed, she carried more than her own reputation. She carried the weight of integrity, accountability, and courage. Sarah glanced at Daniels, who was monitoring the mission from the ground. He nodded, a small, steady affirmation. Ramirez remained at the technical center, watching, protecting the data that had saved her career. Allies, once scarce, now reinforced her purpose. And as the Apache lifted higher, Sarah allowed herself a moment of clarity. She had been grounded. She had been silenced. She had been betrayed. But she had survived, and she had won. The battle wasn't over, not yet, but the first victory had been claimed. The system could no longer hide its flaws, and Sarah Mitchell, pilot, soldier, and now truth-bearer, was ready for whatever came next. The desert stretched beneath her, endless, formidable, yet conquerable. The sky, wide and unyielding, welcomed her back. Every mission she flew from this point forward would be defined not just by skill, but by the unbreakable courage she had displayed on the ground, fighting a war no one else could see. And in that moment, Sarah knew one thing. The sky had always been hers, but now the truth was as well. The base was buzzing in a way Sarah had never experienced before. Helicopters roared overhead, soldiers moved with purpose, but beneath it all ran an undercurrent of tension, the invisible ripple of truth she had just unleashed. News of the Admiral's investigation spread like wildfire, whispered in hushed tones between mess halls, hangars, and barracks. Sarah walked through it all, helmet tucked under her arm, chest tight with anticipation. Eyes followed her, some with suspicion, others with awe. They had watched her grounded, silenced, accused, and now the tide had shifted. Even her commanding officer, once dismissive and cold, avoided meeting her gaze. He knew the evidence was irrefutable. And yet, beneath the professional facade, Sarah sensed something more, a quiet fear. People feared the consequences of being associated with the cover-up. That fear was powerful. It moved through the base, like electricity in the air before a storm. The Admiral had not left yet. He was overseeing every step of the inquiry personally, ensuring no one could manipulate the facts further. Sarah had requested a private audience, and today, the opportunity had arrived. She arrived at the operations building early, accompanied by Ramirez and Daniels. The corridors felt smaller than usual, claustrophobic even, as if the weight of every hidden truth pressed down on them. "Are you ready for this?" Ramirez asked quietly, his eyes scanning the hall for potential observers. Sarah nodded. "I'm not just ready, I have to be." The door to the Admiral's office opened with a quiet hiss. Inside, the Admiral stood, tall and commanding, yet approachable, a rare balance of authority and respect. He motioned for them to enter. "Lieutenant Mitchell," he said, voice steady, "I've reviewed the initial evidence. I want the full story from the beginning." Sarah exhaled slowly, collecting her thoughts. She recounted the mission, from the pre-flight checks to the moment the targeting system had locked onto the convoy, to her instantaneous override that saved dozens of soldiers. She detailed the ignored warnings, the manipulated reports, the erased communications, and the deliberate framing by senior officers. Ramirez presented the dossier, each file corroborating her account, each piece cross-referenced and verified. Daniels confirmed eyewitness testimony, his voice steady despite the tension. The Admiral listened in silence, his eyes scanning the screens, absorbing every detail. Then he asked the question that made Sarah's stomach tighten. "Why was this never brought to my attention?" Sarah's voice didn't waver. Because the system protecting the guilty was higher than anyone on base could reach. They believed I would be silenced or too powerless to fight back. They were wrong. The Admiral leaned back, steepling his fingers. Powerful men hiding behind bureaucracy, dangerous. His gaze shifted to Daniels. And you witnessed all this? Daniels nodded. Yes, sir, and I'll testify to it, every word. The Admiral exhaled, a long, deliberate sound. Then we move forward, immediately. Those responsible will be held accountable. Your name will be restored, Lieutenant Mitchell, and this base will no longer tolerate such manipulations. Relief flooded Sarah's chest, but it was tempered by the awareness that exposing corruption was only the beginning. The ripple effects would be unpredictable. Careers could be ruined, alliances shattered, and resentment lingered in ways that could be dangerous. She had won the first battle, but the war for integrity was just beginning. Orders were sent down immediately. Investigators were dispatched to interview the implicated officers. Maintenance logs were frozen and re-examined. The chain of command trembled as the evidence unfolded, impossible to deny or spin. Officers who had once walked unchallenged now faced scrutiny, their reputations hanging by the thread of truth. Sarah observed it quietly, noting each reaction, each subtle tremor of fear. Some officers attempted to deflect, pointing fingers elsewhere, creating narratives to save themselves. But the raw, indisputable evidence left no room for manipulation. Every alteration was documented, every deletion traced, and the record of deliberate framing was complete. Sarah returned to the hangar later that day, the roar of helicopters overhead a reminder of what she had been denied. She approached her Apache, the familiar smell of oil and metal enveloping her senses. The machine had been idle for weeks, but it now symbolized more than flight. It represented justice reclaimed, integrity restored, and resilience proven. Daniel stood beside her, glancing at the helicopter with renewed respect. "It's good to see you back," he said quietly. "It feels better than good," Sarah replied. "It feels like what it's supposed to feel like." Ramirez, monitoring technical systems from the control station, added, "You didn't just fight for yourself, Sarah. You've exposed something bigger. This changes everything." Sarah ran her fingers along the cockpit, thinking about the missions, the decisions, and the countless lives affected by the negligence and deceit she had uncovered. Her hands had always guided this machine, but now her mind had guided justice. The weight of both responsibilities settled comfortably across her shoulders. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the base, Sarah climbed into the cockpit. She ran through the pre-flight checklist with deliberate precision, her focus absolute. The Apache roared to life beneath her hands, the rotors spinning with power and authority. This was her domain, her control, and her redemption. The first liftoff was cautious, deliberate. She hovered over the base, taking in the scene below, the hangars, the personnel, the other helicopters performing drills. Everything felt simultaneously familiar and surreal. The same base she had walked through as a grounded officer now seemed like a stage for the vindication she had earned. She had faced betrayal, manipulation, and fear, and emerged victorious. Flying higher, she allowed herself to reflect. Her career had been nearly destroyed by those who feared accountability. Her reputation had been tarnished, whispers of incompetence trailing her like shadows. Yet here she was, in command of her aircraft, armed with truth and reinforced by undeniable evidence. The battle had shifted from the desert below to the corridors of power, but Sarah Mitchell was undefeated. She had confronted corruption directly, exposed systemic failure, and emerged with authority restored. And yet, she knew the journey was far from over. Lessons had been learned, trust had been tested, and vigilance would be required to ensure integrity remained intact. Below, the base slowly adjusted to the new reality. Officers who had once dismissed her now observed with a mix of respect and apprehension. Some whispered apologies, others avoided her entirely. The ripple effects of truth were undeniable, reshaping relationships, hierarchies, and perceptions. Hours later, Sarah landed the Apache smoothly, the rotors spinning down in a controlled decrescendo. She removed her helmet, letting her hair fall free, and took a deep breath. The fight for justice had been won, but the responsibility that came with it remained. She glanced at Daniels and Ramirez, their expressions a mixture of relief and determination. Allies now, united by shared risk and a commitment to truth. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting the desert in golden and violet hues. Helicopters continued their drills, unaware of the quiet storm of accountability Sarah had unleashed. She felt a profound satisfaction, vindication achieved, trust partially restored, and integrity defended. But the experience had changed her. She would never take silence for granted again, never allow injustice to be hidden behind authority or procedure. As the base settled into evening routines, Sarah stood before her Apache, feeling the familiar pull of the skis. The roar of rotors and the scent of aviation oil was no longer just comfort. It was a symbol of resilience, of triumph over corruption, and of the power of unyielding truth. She had been grounded, silenced, and betrayed, but she had returned, stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever. The mission that had begun in shadow and silence had transformed into a victory for justice and integrity. The consequences would unfold over weeks and months, affecting careers, relationships, and the culture of the base itself. But Sarah knew this. Exposing the truth was more important than personal safety or comfort. It was about accountability, honor, and the lives of those who trusted her judgment. As night fell over the desert, the stars emerging above, Sarah felt the weight of everything she had endured and the satisfaction of what she had achieved. She climbed into the cockpit one last time that evening, the engines roaring to life beneath her hands. The desert stretched out endlessly, unforgiving yet conquerable, and Sarah Mitchell ascended into the sky, unbroken and unyielding. For the first time in weeks, she smiled. The fight had been hard, the enemy invisible, and the stakes impossibly high. Yet she had emerged victorious, not just in clearing her name, but in defending truth itself. And in the quiet hum of the rotors and the endless horizon, Sarah Mitchell knew one undeniable truth: she would never be silenced again. Her eyes swept over the desert, over the base, over the people below. Every choice, every action, every calculated risk had led her here. And though the journey ahead was uncertain, she was ready. Because she had faced betrayal, corruption, and manipulation, and she had prevailed. The wind whipped past, the Apache's engines thundering like a heartbeat. Sarah gripped the controls, her gaze fixed on the horizon, determination etched into every line of her face. The skis were hers once more, and the truth, unassailable, undeniable, and relentless, was firmly in her grasp. She had been grounded, she had been silenced, she had been betrayed. But now Sarah Mitchell was free. And nothing, not corruption, not fear, not deceit, would ever take that freedom from her again. The base had changed overnight. The quiet tension that had lingered like dust in the corridors gave way to something sharper, something unpredictable, fear mixed with curiosity. Officers whispered behind closed doors, some avoiding Sarah Mitchell entirely, others casting cautious glances her way. News of the Admiral's investigation and the irrefutable evidence she had presented spread rapidly. Careers trembled under the weight of exposure. Reputations that had taken decades to build now cracked under scrutiny. Sarah walked through it all with measured steps, aware of the ripple she had set in motion. It wasn't just vindication she carried now. It was responsibility. The fallout from exposing corruption extended far beyond her career. Policies would be rewritten, personnel reviewed, promotions scrutinized, and alliances tested. And in the middle of it all, she had to maintain focus, control, and clarity, just as she had in the cockpit during combat. The stakes were just as high, but the battlefield had shifted to one of politics, power, and perception. Sarah moved toward the operations center, where Ramirez and Daniels were already coordinating with the Admiral's team. Screens flickered with intercepted communications, reports, and testimony from officers implicated in the cover-up. Each piece of information brought a new wave of revelation. Some officers tried to explain away their involvement, claiming ignorance. Others pointed fingers at subordinates. The system of deception was unraveling, but not without resistance. Some of them aren't going quietly, Ramirez said, eyes glued to a live feed of an interrogation. They're pushing back, claiming procedural errors, technical misunderstandings. They're trying to spin it, but it's too late. The data is irrefutable. Sarah nodded. Let them try, the truth doesn't need spin. But even as they spoke, Sarah felt the weight of the base's changing dynamics. Allies were shifting allegiances, some siding with her, others holding back, unsure of the consequences. Daniels had been hesitant at first, but now his resolve was clear. Together, they represented the undeniable truth, the one fact no one could dispute. Hours turned into a tense day of scrutiny, interviews, and verification. The officers who had orchestrated the cover-up faced formal inquiries, their accounts dissected alongside the evidence Sarah had uncovered. Each lie, each omission, each altered report became a tool in the hands of investigators. And as the web of deceit unraveled, Sarah realized the depth of what she had uncovered. This was bigger than her mission, bigger than a single helicopter, bigger than a single base. The corruption reached higher than she had ever imagined, touching multiple layers of command. By late afternoon, the first wave of consequences hit. Senior officers were relieved of duty pending investigation. Maintenance teams were audited, and flight protocols were rewritten to ensure no single point of failure could endanger lives without accountability. The ripple extended beyond the base, catching attention from higher command structures. Sarah could feel the shift in power, a tangible change in the air, like a storm moving through the desert. Amid the chaos, Sarah returned to the hangar, the Apache waiting like a silent sentinel. She ran her hands along the sleek metal, feeling the familiar hum of energy beneath her fingers. It was a grounding moment, a reminder of why she had fought so hard. The machine represented not just flight, but integrity, skill, and resilience, the very qualities she had defended in exposing the corruption. Daniels joined her, looking thoughtful. "The base is different now," he said quietly. "Some of them are scared, some are angry, some don't know who to trust anymore." Sarah's gaze swept over the rotors, then the horizon. "Good," she said. "They should be. The system failed us and now they know it. But this is only the beginning. We can't let them rebuild the old ways, not while I'm here." Ramirez entered, tablet in hand, showing real-time updates from the Admiral's team. "They're trying to push back politically," he said. "Some officers are appealing to higher authorities, trying to discredit the data. But the Admiral's backing is solid and the logs are airtight. They won't succeed." Sarah nodded, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and determination. The fight for integrity wasn't over, but the momentum was now firmly on her side. Every officer, every soldier, every administrator would now think twice before ignoring warnings or manipulating reports. And every life potentially at risk because of corruption would be safer because she had refused to stay silent. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Sarah climbed into the Apache's cockpit. The engines roared to life beneath her hands, and she felt the familiar surge of control and purpose. She lifted off slowly, hovering over the base. Below her, the activity was frenetic, officers moving quickly, personnel adjusting to the new orders, whispers of the day's revelations echoing through the corridors. She glanced at Daniels in the control tower, who gave a subtle nod. Ramirez monitored the communications, ensuring no interference. Together, they had created a force multiplier, ensuring the integrity of every action moving forward. And as she rose higher, the desert stretched endlessly beneath her, a reminder that while the ground was contested, the sky remained hers. The first flight after being grounded felt different. Every maneuver, every adjustment, carried the weight of justice as much as the thrill of flight. Sarah felt a clarity she hadn't experienced in weeks. The Apache responded perfectly, precise and powerful, just as it had always been. Yet this time it was more than skill, it was purpose. Every soldier she had saved, every lie she had exposed, every barrier she had overcome fueled her actions. Hours passed in the air, the desert transforming beneath her into streaks of gold and shadow. Sarah reflected on how fragile reputation and authority could be, how easily truth could be manipulated by those with power. Yet she also recognized the strength of persistence, the power of evidence, and the unyielding nature of integrity. She had faced the invisible enemy, the one hidden behind bureaucratic walls, and had emerged victorious. But the victory came with vigilance. The ripple of truth would continue to challenge those who had long operated unchecked. The exposed officers would fight back, attempting to salvage careers, influence decisions, and sway opinions. Sarah knew this was inevitable. She had to remain vigilant, assertive, and prepared for any counteraction. As night fell, she landed the Apache smoothly, the engines winding down in a controlled decrescendo. The base seemed smaller from this perspective, constrained, yet the stakes remained enormous. Sarah removed her helmet, letting her hair fall free, and allowed herself a brief moment of reflection. She had survived betrayal, deception, and silencing. She had reclaimed her name, exposed corruption, and ensured accountability. Yet she also understood that leadership carried a constant responsibility. She could not afford complacency. Integrity had to be defended continuously, and vigilance had to be maintained. Every soldier, every officer, every system depended on those willing to challenge authority when it became corrupt. Daniels approached her, voice quiet. "Do you think it's really over?" Sarah shook her head. "No, but we've set the precedent. They'll think twice before hiding failures again. They'll know the consequences, and we've made the system stronger because of it." Ramirez joined them, a small smile on his face. "And you've restored more than your reputation. You've restored trust, Lieutenant. People will remember that." Sarah looked at them both, the weight of responsibility settling alongside the satisfaction of victory. She knew the path ahead would be challenging. The exposed officers would attempt to retaliate, allies could falter, and the politics of the base would shift dramatically. But she had faced worse odds in the air, with life and death balanced on her judgment, and she had prevailed. Climbing back into the Apache, she reflected on the journey. She had been grounded, silenced, and betrayed. She had faced a hidden enemy, one that hid behind authority, paperwork, and deceit. Yet she had overcome it, reclaiming her career, her integrity, and her place in the sky. The desert stretched endlessly, unforgiving yet beautiful. The Apache roared beneath her, a familiar symphony of power, precision, and purpose. Sarah Mitchell was no longer just a pilot. She was a symbol of resilience, integrity, and unyielding courage. As the stars emerged above the desert, the wind whipped past, carrying with it the promise of continued vigilance and relentless pursuit of truth. Sarah tightened her grip on the controls, eyes fixed on the horizon. The mission wasn't over, not entirely. There would always be challenges, obstacles, and those who tried to bend the system to their will. But one thing was certain. Sarah Mitchell had faced betrayal, corruption, and danger, and she had risen above it all. She had reclaimed her place in the sky and ensured that justice, integrity, and truth would not be silenced again. And in the quiet hum of the rotors and the endless expanse of desert below, she knew she was ready for whatever came next. The base was no longer the same. The investigation Sarah Mitchell had triggered had fractured the command structure, leaving officers scrambling to maintain authority while their credibility crumbled. Whispers followed her wherever she went, a mixture of fear, admiration, and resentment. Some soldiers looked at her with newfound respect, others avoided her like a storm on the horizon. She had won the battle for truth, but the war for stability and loyalty had just begun. Even the hangars, once orderly and predictable, seemed tense, each soldier aware that their actions could now be scrutinized. The exposed officers had not vanished quietly. They had regrouped, plotting subtler ways to maintain influence. Meetings behind closed doors, miscommunications, and attempts to discredit the evidence became daily occurrences. The base had transformed into a chessboard, each move calculated, each silence loaded with implication. Sarah understood this was the cost of exposing corruption. Vigilance, strategy, and unrelenting focus. She entered the operations center early, the hum of monitors and the soft clicks of keys filling the room. Ramirez and Daniels were already there, coordinating updates with the Admiral's team and monitoring the reactions of implicated officers. Screens displayed real-time communications, flight logs, and personnel data. The trio had become a cohesive unit, a tight circle of trust amid chaos. "They're not giving up quietly," Ramirez said, pointing to a live feed showing several senior officers attempting to appeal their reassignment and challenge the legitimacy of the evidence. "They're trying to find any procedural loophole to regain control." Sarah's jaw tightened. "Let them try. The truth doesn't have loopholes." The Admiral's presence was constant, a stabilizing force amid the base's turmoil. He had taken direct control of the inquiry, ensuring that no further manipulation could occur. But even he could not stop the subtle games of influence that the implicated officers attempted: whispered suggestions to lower-ranking personnel, attempts to sow doubt about Sarah's motives, and quiet acts of defiance against new procedures. Sarah knew she had to stay one step ahead. Her first order of business was visibility. She would make sure her actions, movements, and decisions were transparent, leaving no room for ambiguity. She coordinated flight operations, checked every maintenance report personally, and held debriefings with soldiers involved in her missions. By demonstrating competence and integrity at every turn, she created a shield of credibility that no rumor could penetrate. Daniels approached her quietly. "They're spreading rumors about you, claiming you're overstepping your authority, manipulating the investigation." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "Let them talk. Facts outweigh whispers. We'll document everything they do, every attempt to interfere. Transparency is our weapon." Hours later, Sarah was in the cockpit of her Apache, hovering above the base, watching the desert stretch endlessly beneath her. The wind whipped past, carrying with it a sense of both freedom and vigilance. She was no longer just flying for herself. She was flying for the integrity of the base, for the soldiers whose lives depended on clear decisions and uncorrupted systems. The control tower crackled to life. Daniel's voice came over the comms, steady but tense. "Incoming personnel, some of the officers being investigated are attempting unauthorized access to restricted areas. They're testing limits, probing weaknesses." Sarah adjusted her course, circling above the base like a hawk observing movement. Her heart beat steadily, a rhythm of focus and awareness. "Let them test," she replied. "We'll catch them every time. No one undermines this base on my watch." Below, the officers moved carefully, aware of surveillance but intent on subtle manipulation. Their actions were calculated like pieces on a chessboard. They hoped to regain influence, to sow enough doubt that the inquiry could stall or be compromised. But Sarah, Ramirez, and Daniels had anticipated this. Every file, every motion, every attempted breach was logged, documented, and sent to the Admiral. By evening, the tension in the base had reached a palpable level. Soldiers moved cautiously, officers whispered in private, and the air seemed thick with uncertainty. The exposed officers were cornered, but they were also dangerous, skilled, experienced, and desperate. Sarah knew that a single misstep, a moment of hesitation, could allow them to regain leverage. She landed the Apache and stepped out, helmet in hand, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. She walked with purpose toward the briefing room, her presence alone enough to command attention. Soldiers parted instinctively, officers froze mid-step, and the base felt suspended in a state of controlled chaos. Inside the briefing room, the Admiral was waiting, reviewing new reports of attempted interference. "They're more dangerous than anticipated," he said, "but you've handled this with exceptional foresight, Lieutenant Mitchell." Sarah nodded. "Sir, they're testing boundaries. We need to remain vigilant, document everything, and act decisively. Any delay or hesitation could give them an opportunity to disrupt the investigation or manipulate personnel." The Admiral studied her carefully. "You've proven remarkable resilience and judgment, But understand this, they will not yield easily. The fight will continue until the last stone of corruption is turned. I understand, sir, Sarah replied, and I'm ready. The next day, a subtle escalation began. Small acts of defiance appeared, unauthorized communications, attempts to bypass new protocols, whispered doubts among junior officers. Sarah recognized the patterns immediately. She coordinated with Ramirez and Daniels to monitor every move, ensuring that each act of defiance was documented and countered. Flying above the base again, Sarah observed the subtle chaos below. She noted patterns, predicted movements, and adjusted patrols and monitoring accordingly. Her control of the situation mirrored her precision in the cockpit, every action deliberate, every decision informed by data and observation. By nightfall, a decisive moment arrived. One of the implicated officers attempted to access restricted systems, hopping to erase or alter evidence. Security protocols flagged the attempt immediately. Daniels relayed the information to the Admiral, who authorized immediate containment. The officer was intercepted before any damage occurred. Sarah landed smoothly, exiting the Apache with a calm, measured authority. She met the officer in the hangar, gaze steady and unwavering. "You've had every chance to cooperate," she said quietly. "But you chose to test limits. Every attempt has been documented. Consequences will follow." The officer's face paled. You're relentless." Sarah didn't flinch. "I'm responsible, and responsibility isn't negotiable." Word of the interception spread quickly, reinforcing her authority and the seriousness of accountability. Soldiers observed, whispers of respect replacing previous fear. Even those still aligned with the exposed officers recognized that resistance was futile against someone who combined skill, evidence, and unshakable integrity. By the end of the week, the base began to stabilize. The exposed officers were formally reprimanded, reassigned, or removed. Procedures were rewritten, flight protocols updated, and transparency reinforced across all departments. The ripple of truth had reshaped the base, leaving it stronger, safer, and more disciplined. Sarah stood atop a control platform, watching helicopters lift off into the desert sky. The wind carried a sense of renewal, of hard-won victory tempered by vigilance. She reflected on the journey, being grounded, silenced, betrayed, and ultimately vindicated. The sky had always been her domain, but now the ground was too. Daniels and Ramirez joined her, expressions a mixture of relief and satisfaction. "The base is stabilizing," Daniels said. "They know you won't let them get away with anything." Sarah nodded, eyes scanning the horizon. "This isn't just about me. It's about ensuring that integrity isn't optional, that courage isn't punished, that the system protects those it's meant to serve, not shield the corrupt." Ramirez smiled faintly. "You've become more than a pilot, Sarah. You're a symbol of resilience, accountability, and truth." A faint smile touched her lips. She didn't seek recognition, but she understood the significance. The legend of her resilience, of her refusal to be silenced, was already spreading. Soldiers would remember, officers would respect, and the next generation would be inspired. The night settled over the base, stars emerging above the desert expanse. Sarah climbed into the Apache one last time, the engines roaring to life beneath her hands. The rotors cut through the cool night air, steady, precise, and powerful. She lifted off, hovering above the base, feeling the rhythm of control, authority, and responsibility. Below, the base rested, stronger than before, yet always under the watchful eye of those who demanded integrity. And above, Sarah Mitchell soared, a sentinel of truth and justice, ready to face whatever came next. She had been grounded, she had been silenced, she had been betrayed. And yet, through vigilance, courage, and unyielding determination, she had not only reclaimed her place in the sky, but reshaped the ground below into a testament to accountability. The mission wasn't over. The skis were endless and challenges would arise. But Sarah Mitchell had proven one undeniable fact: She would never be silenced again. And as the Apache roared across the desert night, a new legend was quietly cemented, one of resilience, truth, and unwavering courage. The desert sun rose like fire over the horizon, igniting the base in gold and shadow. Sarah Mitchell stood on the tarmac, helmet in hand, Apache looming behind her. The events of the past weeks had transformed the base into a different place, a place where accountability mattered, where truth could no longer be hidden behind the veneer of rank. Yet Sarah knew that vigilance was eternal. The battles she had faced in the corridors of command had been just as dangerous as any firefight, and the consequences of complacency were unforgiving. She moved through the base with calm authority, every step measured, every glance deliberate. Soldiers and officers alike watched her passage, a mixture of awe and respect tempered with lingering fear. Even those who had once whispered doubts or spread rumors now maintained a respectful distance. She had become more than a pilot. She was a living embodiment of resilience, integrity, and unshakable courage. Ramirez intercepted her near the operations center. "We've compiled the final reports, Sarah. The evidence has been submitted to the Admiral and higher command. Every officer involved has been accounted for. The base protocols have been rewritten, and oversight has been reinforced. There's no way to spin this now." Sarah nodded, her gaze drifting to the horizon. "Good, but we remain vigilant. Corruption doesn't vanish, it mutates. We can't allow complacency to creep in." Daniels joined them, voice steady but laced with quiet admiration. "You've done something remarkable, not just for yourself but for every soldier here." Sarah allowed herself a brief smile. "We did it together, but the work isn't finished. Culture doesn't change overnight, even with the truth on the table." The sound of rotors spinning announced the arrival of the Admiral. His presence was commanding yet approachable, the weight of authority and trust carried effortlessly. "Lieutenant Mitchell," he said, voice strong, "you've changed this base in a way few could imagine. Integrity has been restored and accountability reinforced. You've proven that courage, when paired with truth, is stronger than fear and manipulation." Sarah bowed her head respectfully. "Thank you, sir. I only did what was necessary." The Admiral gestured toward the Apache. "And now, Lieutenant, it is time to return to the sky, the domain that has always belonged to you. Today, your career, your integrity, and your reputation are fully restored. You've earned more than that. You've earned the respect of every soldier on this base and beyond." The ceremony was quiet but powerful. Soldiers assembled, standing rigidly at attention. The officers who had resisted accountability watched from a distance, faces etched with defeat. Sarah's commanding officer approached cautiously, eyes lowered. "Lieutenant Mitchell, I misjudged you," he admitted quietly. "Your skill, courage, and integrity, I see them now." Sarah nodded, acknowledging the apology but not dwelling on it. The past had been treacherous, but the present demanded focus. "Thank you," she said simply. "Let's make sure the lessons of the past are never forgotten." The Apache engines roared to life beneath her, vibrating through the tarmac like a living heartbeat. She climbed into the cockpit, fingers brushing the controls with familiarity and purpose. The world outside seemed smaller from this vantage, the desert sprawling endlessly, a reminder of the vast challenges and opportunities that lay ahead. As she lifted off, the base spread beneath her like a map of victories and scars. Every building, every soldier, every helicopter a reminder of what had been at stake. The wind whipped past, carrying the scent of oil, metal, and desert sand. Every maneuver she executed was precise, deliberate, a dance of skill and authority. Below, the soldiers watched, some saluting instinctively, others simply standing in awe. The legend of Sarah Mitchell was already taking shape, not just as a pilot, but as a symbol of unyielding courage and integrity. The same soldier who had been grounded and silenced now commanded respect, authority, and trust. Ramirez's voice crackled over the comms. "Everything is secure. The reports, the evidence, the protocols, they're all finalized. The base is stable." Sarah's eyes scanned the horizon, the endless desert stretching toward distant mountains. Good, but we stay vigilant. Challenges will come, and the skis demand constant attention. Integrity requires daily defense. Daniel spoke from the control tower, voice steady. You've set a new standard, Sarah, for all of us. The Apache banked gracefully, the rotors cutting through the air with perfect precision. Every decision, every action, every heartbeat was synchronized with purpose and clarity. Sarah reflected on the journey, from betrayal to vindication, from silence to authority. The same courage that had saved lives in combat now protected truth and accountability, and the lives of countless soldiers. Hours passed in flight, Sarah practicing maneuvers, observing the base, and ensuring that every protocol, every safeguard, every procedure was being followed. Her vigilance was constant, precise, unyielding. The lessons of betrayal and manipulation had sharpened her instincts, not just in the air but in leadership, oversight, and strategy. As night fell, stars emerged above the desert, twinkling like distant beacons. The Apache silhouette cut through the twilight, powerful and precise. Below, the base glowed with lights, activity continuing in measured, disciplined rhythm. Sarah descended, landing with practiced grace. The engines wound down, rotors slowing as she removed her helmet and surveyed the desert around her. The weight of responsibility was still heavy, but so was the satisfaction of victory. She had faced corruption, manipulation, and betrayal, and emerged not just unbroken but triumphant. The Admiral's support, the integrity of her team, and the undeniable evidence had ensured that truth prevailed. Sarah walked through the hangar, touching the Apache lightly. "You're more than a machine," she whispered. "You're a symbol of what we can achieve when we refuse to be silenced." Ramirez and Daniels flanked her. "What now?" Ramirez asked. "Now," Sarah said, gaze sweeping over the desert, the base, and the night sky, "we make sure the lessons endure. We protect truth. We maintain integrity. And we stay ready for every challenge, every mission, every threat." Her career was restored, her reputation unblemished, and her authority unquestioned. Yet the real victory was deeper. The culture of the base had shifted, accountability had been enforced, and the lessons of integrity were indelibly written into every protocol, every officer's mind, every soldier's understanding. The desert was quiet now, only the faint hum of distant helicopters echoing against the mountains. Sarah climbed back into the Apache one final time that night, engines roaring to life beneath her. The sky stretched endlessly, vast, formidable, and unforgiving. She banked sharply, ascending higher, feeling the exhilaration of command, freedom, and vindication. Below, the base lay peaceful, orderly, and secure, a testament to courage, integrity, and unyielding perseverance. Sarah Mitchell had not only reclaimed her career, she had reshaped the environment around her, ensuring that no one would again be silenced or betrayed without consequence. Flying higher into the night, the stars above glittering like distant guides, Sarah reflected on the journey. She had been grounded, silenced, and betrayed, but she had returned stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever. Her mission had evolved from survival to leadership, from skill to integrity, from vindication to legacy. The Apache roared beneath her, a loyal extension of her will. The desert stretched endlessly, a canvas of challenge and opportunity. And Sarah Mitchell soared, unbroken, unyielding, a legend forged through courage, truth, and resilience. She had faced the impossible, and she had prevailed. And now, nothing could ever silence her again.